I never thought the smell of barbecue in my own backyard would make my stomach turn. My name is Corinne. I'm 68 years old, and I've been a widow for a decade. That Saturday afternoon, I took the drive out to Palm Springs to check on my second home, a spacious property with a beautiful garden and pool that I was about to put on the rental market. I had the perfect tenants lined up and ready to sign. I just needed to do a final walkthrough to make sure everything was pristine. When I pulled up, 5 cars I didn't recognize were blocking the driveway. Music was thumping from the backyard. It wasn't a break-in. It was a full-blown celebration. I walked down the side path and stopped dead in my tracks. There were at least 30 people sprawled across my property. Some were swimming. Others were drinking. And a man I'd never seen before was manning my grill. Right in the center of it all was Sloane, my daughter-in-law, laughing hysterically with her cousins while drying her hands on the expensive linen towels I only kept out for special guests. My son, Wesley, jogged over when he spotted me. He didn't look embarrassed, if anything. He looked mildly annoyed by the interruption. He was holding a beer from my private stash. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't alert his wife's family. "I came to prep the house for the new renters. What exactly is all this, Wesley?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Sloane wanted to get her family together, and hotels out here are insanely expensive. Don't be mad. I'm your son. This house is going to be mine eventually anyway. Just relax and grab a drink." I just stared at him. His arrogance wasn't born out of malice. It came from absolute comfort. It was the audacity of a man who had never been forced to earn the things he enjoyed. Across the yard, Sloane caught my eye and raised her glass. Her smile was a quiet, smug challenge. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene in front of 30 strangers. I just gave a slow nod. I walked through the back door, grabbed the spare set of house keys hanging in the kitchen, and walked right back out. But before I got into my car, I walked over to the street curb. With one firm motion, I opened the utility cover and shut off the main water valve to the house. If they wanted to throw a party on my dime, it was going to be a dry one. The drive back to my main house in Los Angeles was completely quiet. I didn't shed a single tear. At my age, crying is reserved for actual tragedies, not predictable disappointments. Wesley had always been a bit passive, easily molded like clay in Sloane's hands. For years, I'd let their little slights slide, her passive-aggressive comments about my furniture, my clothes. I thought keeping the peace was worth my silence. I was wrong. When I got home, I sat in my living room with a cup of black tea and opened my banking app. I had a joint account with Wesley, a rainy day fund I'd set up years ago just in case of an emergency. I wanted to make sure he'd never be in a bind if I suddenly got sick. I checked the balance. Exactly $2,800 was missing. I clicked on the transaction history. There were recent charges at a premium butcher shop, a high-end liquor store, and a party supply outlet. My emergency medical fund was financing Sloane's family weekend getaway. I took a deep breath. With 3 taps on my screen, I transferred every remaining cent into my private checking account. Then, I froze the shared card. At 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Wesley. "Mom, something's wrong with the house. None of the toilets have water, and there are 30 people here. Plus, my card just got declined at the grocery store when I went on an ice run. Can you transfer me some cash?" I kept my voice completely flat, like I was reading him the weather report. "How strange about the water. Wesley, I suppose you'll have to call an emergency plumber. And as for the card, I canceled it. That money was for medical emergencies, not prime rib. Mom Sloan is furious. Her parents can't even use the bathroom. You can't just leave us hanging like this. You're the host, Wesley. Figure it out. Good night. I hung up and put my phone on silent. The real reconstruction of my boundaries had just begun. Sunday morning, while I pictured the absolute hygienic nightmare unfolding at the Palm Springs house, I made an important phone call. Mac is a general contractor who's done work for me since my husband was alive. A man of few words and extreme efficiency. I asked him to meet me for coffee. Mac, I need a massive favor, I told him, sliding a thick envelope of cash across the table. I want to rip out the living room floors at the vacation house and gut the plumbing in all the bathrooms. He frowned, thumbing through the bills. When were you thinking? Corinne, I can probably squeeze you in starting Wednesday. No, I need you to start tomorrow, Monday, at 6 a.m. sharp. And Mac, I want the very first step to be pulling up the toilets and taking sledgehammers to the entryway tile. Make it loud. Mac gave me a half smile, guessing there was a lot more to the story, but he didn't ask any questions. We'll be there at 6, bringing the heavy machinery. That same afternoon, I drove back out to the desert property. I parked 2 blocks away and walked over, using my master key. I slipped in through the service door while everyone was out on the front patio nursing their hangovers. I went straight to the master bedroom. I stripped the bed of my Egyptian cotton sheets, took down a small painting I loved, and grabbed my mother's vintage silver flatware from the dining hutch. I stuffed it all into 2 dark duffel bags. No one saw me enter, and no one saw me leave. I could hear Sloan loudly complaining in the kitchen that the weekend plumber Wesley found was charging an arm and a leg, and still hadn't shown up. I heard my son apologizing to his father-in-law, taking the blame for my mom's terrible plumbing. I smiled to myself. They had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them at dawn, at 5:45 a.m. on Monday. My phone lit up with a text from Mac. We're at the door, at 6:05 a.m. My phone started ringing off the hook. It was Wesley. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Mom! He yelled, his voice barely audible over the screeching of metal and breaking tile in the background. There are guys tearing up the living room. They just walked right in with keys. The foreman said you sent them. Oh, yes, I answered casually, pouring my morning coffee. Since you mentioned the plumbing was acting up, I decided to fast-track the renovations before the new renters move in. It's necessary maintenance. But we're sleeping. Sloane's aunt practically had a heart attack when the hammering started, and there are no toilets. They took them out to the yard. I could hear Sloane shrieking in the background about construction dust ruining her designer luggage, demanding Wesley do something. It's an active construction zone now. Wesley. For liability reasons, everyone needs to vacate the premises immediately. It's really not a safe environment for guests. We bought groceries through Tuesday. You can't just kick us out. I'm not kicking you out. The house is simply uninhabitable. Make sure you lock the back door on your way out. By 9 a.m. Mac texted me a photo. All 5 cars were gone. The picture showed my living room coated in a thick layer of drywall dust, the furniture shoved under plastic tarps, and the ceramic floor half destroyed. Sloane's family had to pack up their dust-covered bags while the kids cried. Unable to even wash their faces, they had to drive 2.5 hours back to Los Angeles, sitting in brutal Monday morning rush hour traffic. I sat on my balcony, enjoying the cool morning breeze. I had taken my house back without raising my voice, without an argument. and without giving a single unnecessary explanation. But I knew the real storm was on its way. It wasn't even 4 hours later when my doorbell started ringing aggressively. Wesley and Sloane were standing on my porch. She had her arms crossed, looking absolutely homicidal. He just looked pale and exhausted. I opened the door and stepped aside, letting them in without a word. They marched into the living room. Sloane didn't even wait for me to sit down. "What you did was unbelievably disrespectful. Corinne, you humiliated my family. You treated us like we were squatters instead of your own son's family." I looked her up and down, letting my eyes rest on her shoes, which were tracking white drywall dust onto my rug. "You were squatters, Sloane. Nobody asked my permission." I walked over to my desk drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I handed it to Wesley. "What is this?" he asked, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded it. "That's your itemized bill. It covers the $2,800 you stole from our emergency fund to buy booze and steaks for your party. At the bottom, you'll see the estimate my landscaper gave me to fix the grass your relatives ruined by parking their trucks on the lawn, plus the cost to deep shock the pool." "It's your house," Sloane interjected, her voice pitching up. "You're supposed to support Wesley." "I do support my son," I replied coldly. "I don't finance your family's weekend benders." Wesley stared at the paper. "Mom, I don't have this kind of cash right now. You know that." "I do. Which is why, starting today, I am no longer paying for your car insurance or your cell phone plan until the debt is settled." I walked over to the entryway table where Wesley had tossed his keys when he walked in. With one smooth motion, I unclipped the spare key to my house from his key ring and slipped it into my pocket. "Until you two learn to respect my boundaries, visits to this house are by invitation only. You can see yourselves out." A week passed in total silence. I thought the message had finally sunk in, until Saturday evening when I saw Wesley's car pull up to my curb. They weren't alone. Sloane's parents climbed out of the back seat. They were carrying grocery bags stuffed with fresh vegetables, raw meat, and a bakery cake. It was a classic Sloane maneuver. She was trying to force normalcy, bulldoze her way back into my space, and make me play the perfect hostess so she wouldn't lose face in front of her parents. She wanted to commandeer my kitchen, my plates, and my time to prove she was still the one calling the shots. I had to act fast. I ran upstairs, tossed some clothes into a weekender bag, and hurried back down. I went into the kitchen, grabbed my heavy cast iron pans, and locked them in the pantry. I locked the liquor cabinet, too. When the doorbell rang, I opened it wearing my coat, car keys dangling from my fingers. "Hi, Corinne," Sloane said, flashing a tight, deeply fake smile. "We decided to come make a nice family dinner, to smooth things over." "What an interesting choice," I said, squeezing past them onto the porch. "Unfortunately, I'm not available. I'm heading up to a hot springs resort in Ojai for the weekend." "What?" "But we bought all this food," Sloane's mother protested, awkwardly holding up a package of raw chicken. "The kitchen's right inside," I said, pointing behind them. "But the pans, the spices, and the good wine are locked up. If you guys are into raw poultry, the dining table is all yours." I walked straight to my car, completely ignoring Wesley's dropped jaw and his wife's beet-red face. I pulled out of the driveway and left them standing stranded on the sidewalk. Soaking in the mineral baths in Ojai that weekend, my mind finally cleared. The Palm Springs house had turned into a battlefield. As long as I owned that property, Sloane would view it as her imminent inheritance, a royal right she'd acquired by marriage. I didn't need that house. I needed peace. On Monday morning, instead of calling my prospective renters, I called Warren, a retired real estate investor who had been bugging me to sell the place to him for years. I didn't want to deal with open houses or real estate agents. "Warren, you still interested in the desert house?" I asked. "I've got the checkbook ready." "Corinne, what's your number?" I gave him a very reasonable price. We shook hands on it that afternoon. Since Mac was already mid-renovation, Warren was thrilled to buy the house as is, so he could finish the floors to his own taste. Within days, the paperwork was signed, the deed was transferred, and the cash was sitting safely in a private account under my name. Before handing over the keys, I did one last walk through. Sitting in the dining room was the massive carved oak table that Sloane would always run her hands over, saying, "This is going to look so perfect in my house when you're done with it." I called a local antique dealer on the spot. I sold him the table, along with a French mirror Sloane had heavily coveted, for a fraction of what they were worth. I stood there and watched the movers load them onto a truck. The house felt empty, echoing when I walked. I didn't feel an ounce of nostalgia. All I felt was deep, profound relief. I had severed the anchor tying them to my assets. My future wasn't built out of bricks they could lay claim to anymore. It was just numbers on a screen, under my absolute control. 3 weeks after the sale, Labor Day weekend rolled around. Assuming my anger had cooled off, Sloane and Wesley tried one more maneuver. They drove out to Palm Springs. Their plan was obvious: break in, unpack, and shoot me a casual text saying they were there, forcing me to accept it. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. "Mom," Wesley's voice was shaking, a frantic mix of panic and utter confusion. "Mom, I'm at the Palm Springs house. There are people inside. There are painters. And some woman is measuring the windows. I told them I was calling the cops, but they said the owner let them in." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "They're telling the truth. Wesley." The new owner let them in. Dead silence on the line. I could hear Sloane hissing aggressively in the background. What did she say? What's going on? "The new owner, Mom. I don't understand." "I sold the house. Wesley closed on it a couple of weeks ago. It's not ours anymore. I highly suggest you get off the porch. You're trespassing. And Warren doesn't have the patience I do. You sold our house." The scream didn't come from my son. It came from Sloane, who had snatched the phone right out of his hand. "You had no right. That was your son's inheritance. The furniture you promised me was in there. Inheritance is a concept for dead people, Sloane, and my lungs are working just fine," I replied, my voice steady as a rock. "As for the furniture, I sold it to an antique dealer. I'm using the money to go to Italy in the spring. Have a safe drive back to LA." I hung up before she could screech again. I looked at my passport sitting on the kitchen counter. For the first time in a decade, the world felt wide open. I knew they wouldn't just take that lying down. The drive from the desert takes a couple of hours, plenty of time for Sloane to whip Wesley into a frenzy. I used that time productively. That very afternoon, I had a locksmith come out and change every deadbolt on my Los Angeles house. Right around 5 p.m., I heard their car screech to a halt at my curb. Heavy, angry footsteps stomped up the porch. Then came the metallic scratching of a key trying to turn, catching, and failing. Wesley shoved his shoulder against the wood. Nothing. He rattled the handle in frustration. "Mom, open the door," he yelled. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked over to the large picture window in the living room, cranked the glass open just a few inches, and stood behind the screen. "Did you lose something, Wesley?" I asked. Sloane leaned in over his shoulder, her face blotchy with rage. "You changed the locks. You're insane. You're putting us out on the street. You have your own apartment," I reminded her. "This is my house and my door." "You sold the house behind my back," Wesley pleaded, looking genuinely teary-eyed. "You're treating me like a stranger. I'm treating you like an independent adult," I corrected him. "An adult who stood by while his wife and 30 strangers trampled all over my property and drained my bank account. That money was for his future." Sloane shrieked. "You're so selfish." "My money is for my present," I said, locking eyes with her until she finally looked away. "Wesley, I love you because you are my son, but I am not going to let your lack of a spine turn me into a servant in my own life. When you're ready to speak to me with respect and alone, you can call me." I cranked the window shut. I pulled the curtains. I listened to them bicker on the porch for another 10 minutes before I finally heard the car start up and drive away. 6 months passed. I kept my promise to myself and flew to Italy. I walked the cobblestone streets of Florence, ate pasta for hours without looking at a clock, and spent my money entirely on myself. During that time, I blocked Sloane on every social media platform and blocked her phone number. I kept a line of communication open with Wesley, but it was strictly business. I only replied to practical texts or brief holiday wishes. One Tuesday afternoon after I'd gotten back, my doorbell rang. It was Wesley. He was alone. He was holding a small box of my favorite cookies from a bakery downtown. He looked a little thinner, a little more tired, but his eyes had a clarity to them I hadn't seen since before he got married. I stepped outside and sat with him on the porch chairs. I didn't invite him inside. The borders had to remain secure. "Mom," he started, staring down at his hands. "It's been a rough few months. Sloane won't stop talking about what you did. She's obsessed with it. It's exhausting living with someone who thinks the universe owes them something," I said softly. "I hope it's not rubbing off on you." He gave a bitter, small smile. "No. I've realized a lot lately. I was a coward. Mom. I let her disrespect you because it was easier than fighting with her at home. I'm sorry. I really am." I reached over and took one of the cookies. They were perfectly fresh. "Apologies are a great place to start, Wesley, but actions are what actually matter. I want you in my life, but the rules are different now. My assets are mine. My house is mine. If Sloane ever sets foot on this property again, you cease to exist to me." He nodded slowly. He understood. There was no dramatic hugging, no tearful scene of absolute forgiveness. It was just the raw, quiet reality of two adults drawing up a new contract. That night, after he left, I poured myself a glass of the good wine I'd saved from his wife's family. I toasted to an empty room. I had built a beautiful life. And finally, I had learned what it meant to hold my own keys. We often trick ourselves into thinking that defending our territory requires screaming matches, endless arguments, or exhausting justifications. But the truth is, the highest form of self-respect is usually quiet, swift, and practical. Setting boundaries isn't about punishing the other person. It's about protecting your own peace, your hard work, and your sanity. Respect isn't something you beg for or debate over. You enforce it with concrete actions. Accepting that we aren't responsible for someone else's immaturity or entitlement lifts a massive weight off our shoulders. Real independence happens The second you realize your peace of mind is entirely non-negotiable, and that being family is never a blank check for abuse. Sometimes, cutting the cord on the people who view you as nothing but an ATM is the only way to finally become the owner of your own life.